At StriveTogether, we refuse to live in a world where race, place, or circumstance determines a student's future. We believe that in order to change that reality, that we have to change systems to more effectively serve our youth and families. And through a significant investment that we've made, we have empowered communities to be able to change policy and change systems for the better. In Texas, there was a significant opportunity to communicate not just with policymakers in Austin, but with community stakeholders around the state and mobilize the state around this huge opportunity to invest in school financing in a way that hadn't been done.
I think what spurred HB3 was this constant battle between education advocates that knew and felt like they needed more resources, but they wanted it as unrestricted as possible. And then you had fiscal conservatives who said, look at the outcomes, they're not what we wanted to be, why would we throw more money at it? Instead, let's disrupt the system, more vouchers, more charters, and neither side had a majority in the discussion, and ultimately, nothing would get done.
The legislature said, well, we're not going to give you any money, but we're going to appoint a commission. And all the educators roll their eyes. Here we go again, another commission. Because we've had commissions before, and they would either meet for a year and a half and do nothing, or they'd meet and come up with some ideas, but they have no recommendations, or they'd meet and come up with some ideas, and then if they came up with recommendations, they didn't have money. So now this one was different. There was a commission that actually studied best practice. I testified in front of that commission multiple times. It was bipartisan, it was bicameral. It had educators on the commission.
It had 6 legislators and 7 people from outside. A superintendent, a CFO, a teacher, education advocates, etc. And its job was to study the K-12 funding system for a year and make a series of recommendations for legislators to consider in the 2019 legislative session. This was the first commission that focused principally on outcomes. What outcomes did we want for our kids? And therefore, what strategies should we fund to try and get those outcomes? We heard about great dual language strategies in San Antonio and the Rio Grande Valley. We heard about teacher incentive and compensation strategies in Dallas and in Lubbock, Texas. We heard about lots of great things from around the state, and it incorporated a series of 35 recommendations that ultimately became the gist of the bill.
Those recommendations spanned 4 different areas, making sure that every child is ready to learn, every child is ready to earn, every educator is ready to teach, and making sure that every child is adequately and equitably supported.
It brought the right cross-section of people to the table representing business and educators and researchers. They based it on objective data. They had many, many hearings where they said, come share with us. What is the data about 3rd grade outcomes or about early literacy or about college readiness? And then they took the time to craft that data into ways to strategically invest in education and created a report that was well received by Republicans, Democrats, researchers, practitioners. It was a jumping off point that allowed legislators from across the aisle to come together with a common vision and a common way to start to get there.
The commission's work was critical to this whole process because here in Texas, as in many states, the capacity in the legislature is limited. We have limited time, limited energy and resources, and we only meet for 5 months every other year here in Texas. We were fortunate because we had a commission set up outside of the legislative process that was kind of insulated from certain political pressures to develop ideas that eventually became the framework for House Bill 3.
We leaned and asked for teacher groups to come testify during the session because their voice mattered. If we were going to pay our best teachers more, significantly more, especially if they would agree to go to our most challenging schools in terms of economic disadvantage, we needed their voice.
Teachers really are the experts. They're the ones who work with the students and the families every single day. We really believed that there were teachers out there who wanted to have a say in the policies that impacted their classroom, who had an important perspective that had never been brought to the conversation and that they could bring to the table.
Oftentimes, a lot of policies in education are put past by people who have never had any actual experience in the classroom. They don't know what it actually looks like when you actually implement all the policies that we put in place. And so I want the perspective of what that looks like not to be secondhand. I don't want it to be a story down the line. I don't want it to be a teacher union that maybe doesn't represent me. I want it to be my actual authentic voice so that they actually hear the real story of the authentic experience of a teacher.
Then we formed something called InvestEd Texas. We said this needs to be advocated by fellow backbones like Commit, E3 Alliance in Austin, Good Reason Houston, and that we needed to organize business chambers around the state because this is their workforce pipeline. And they needed to be advocating, they needed to understand what was in the bill, they needed to sell it with their local community stakeholders and sell it with their local legislators. In our state, if business is saying this is something that we want, that carries frankly more weight than other groups. And so it was important to advocate and organize that group.
One thing about Texas politics is you really can't get anything done without the rural voice because there is such a large rural contingency. And so we had to make sure that everything we did was inclusive of not just the big urbans, but also the rural voice. And so we had a lot of chambers from small areas that could really lean on their legislators to support the bills.
Compromise is difficult. But compromise is much easier when you are basing your decisions not based on the way it happened to you or emotions, but on the objective data. Our role is to bring the objective data to the table to make compromise easier. We work with school districts, higher ed, nonprofit, civic and business partners to say, how do we not just address the needs of one student or 10 or 100 or 1,000, but how do we change education systems and outcomes for all of our students?
Our kindergarten readiness study was the first longitudinal tie to how did kids come to kindergarten ready, what were those factors, and then how did that relate to how they did on third grade standardized tests. And we had the data to show that kids who were kindergarten ready were 4 to 5 times more likely to pass their third grade math and reading assessments, and they were 6 times more likely to do it at a college readiness level.
We used the committee itself to talk about each issue, to sort of curate the ideas, to take more testimony, to refine what the ultimate policy recommendation would be. When I say policy recommendation, I mean the actual language of the bill. How do we do this? What does it look like? What features should it have or not have? It became undeniable because all the stories were the same. All the results were the same. It wasn't a guess or a Hail Mary. We weren't sitting there with your fingers crossed, hoping it worked. You knew that it did. And then we opened it up to the rest of the House, talked to our colleagues about the features, troubleshoot the ways it would affect different parts of the state, urban, rural, super rural. And it was almost a unanimous vote out of the House, and then went to the Senate. They added some features, and then we had a conference committee and figured it out.
It's about getting wins for all students that we serve around the country. We want the nearly 70 network members that we have to be able to draw from the wins in places like Texas, learn from the good ideas, and begin to employ those at home. And I think that's what we'll be able to do as a result of this work.
If I had to point to one factor that drove us, it was the use of data, because data is the voice of our kids. Kids don't have paid lobbyists, they can't vote. And so by using the data, we could drive to what strategies and for whom did we need to drive funding toward to make sure that every kid in Texas has the same ability to access, frankly, the American dream.
I would say partnership was key to the success of HB3. In fact, that was the basis of success. For decades, we had not come together as partners to set aside individual agendas and say, how could we work together towards the betterment of investing in outcomes for our students?
We have the system we have because we choose to have it. And that shouldn't be a pessimistic view. It should feel empowering that we can also change the system, and we can do it when we empower our communities, our educators, and our students to make that change possible.
The process we went through, the political fighting, the kumbaya moment, the passage, the bill signing, none of it matters if they can't feel it in their classroom and in their experience.
I want my kids to succeed. I want whatever dream that they want to happen, I want them to make sure that there aren't any barriers keeping them from achieving it. We're going to be able to see student achievement really rising in those areas that really need it the most, our rural and our urban districts.
I think the winners from this bill are kids who come from low-income backgrounds, English language learners, kids who historically have been marginalized. I think who's also benefited are teachers who want to be paid well, who want to be treated like the professionals that they are. And what HB 3 means for the nation is an example of what a thoughtful commission, informed by data, focused on outcomes, can serve as an example for other states to replicate, and we can learn from each other.
An investment like this will result in a child being able to read a bedtime story to her younger brother. It means that a young man will be the first in his family to graduate from college. It means that a teacher who has been working so hard will finally get a reward and recognition for that excellence. The stories that come from HB 3 are millions of lives changed in individual ways.